2, 3, 4, 5
On the floor.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a daily show on the Miami Heat and the NBA featuring Ethan Skolnick with Alphonse Sidney, Alex Toledo, and Greg Sylvander. Part of the 5 Reasons Sports Network.
All right, Ethan Skolnick back on 5 on the Floor. Here is today's floor plan. It's actually more than just a one-day floor plan. This is a week and a half floor plan. So we're looking ahead, just as we did a 5-part series about Pat Riley's press conference. Now we're going to do at least a 5-part series about the upcoming NBA draft, which comes up on the 20th. Of course, this is weird because usually it is at the end of, Usually June, end of June, right after the NBA Finals, right before free agency. It's going to be before free agency again, but this time it's going to be in November, right before Thanksgiving. For this particular episode, I've got Greg Sylvander, I've got Alex Toledo. On other episodes, you can catch Alphonse Sidney, Brady Hawk, and Nikias Duncan. Guys, what we're going to do before we look forward is we're going to look back. We're going to look at the past 10 Miami Heat drafts to try to get a sense of how the Heat's philosophy on drafting has changed. Because I think if we looked at this 10 years ago during the Big Three era, again, the drafting of Michael Beasley in 2008, which didn't work out the way that they'd hoped. Then they get into the Big Three era. The draft became low priority. They also didn't have a lot of picks because they had to give up those picks to give in the sign-in trades for Bosh and LeBron. So they gave up 4 first-round picks. So they didn't really value the picks. They valued the elite guys that they were bringing in. But then things pivoted and have changed quite a bit since. So, Greg, before we kind of get into the specifics of these years, how has the Heat philosophy changed in your view?
Well, I mean, they've made so many strides from a player development perspective that they're looking for guys that are utility knives to a degree. You know, you think back to Justice Winslow and Jay Rich. I think that really one of the overarching philosophies we've started to see more and more is, and I think that you could probably say this for most NBA teams, but it's been really apparent with Miami, is they just go best player available. I remember when they drafted Bam Adebayo, there were a lot of question marks with a max contract to Hassan Whiteside already on the roster. And obviously maybe at that point they had recognized that it was time to come up with a contingency plan from a big man perspective, but they took Bam regardless of the fact that they had $98 million committed to him. Even with Tyler Hero, I think that there was some logjam stuff that we had kind of talked about, and they threw caution to the wind and they took the guy that they liked most. So I think that that's really the biggest thing, is that we really can't look at exact needs. At least that's been how it's gone. I don't know if with this particular team, as deep as it is, if that may be a precursor to looking at a specific need more than they maybe have in the last 5 years.
When you look at it overall, Alex, obviously the last 2 major draft picks that they've made, they reached to one school, Kentucky, after there are a lot of jokes about the Duke thing. One of the things that I found fascinating about the Riley presser was that he talked about how guys are coming out more ready than he was accustomed to. Now, I don't know if that's just because he's taking Kentucky guys because he's trying to hype this pick, or because whether that's really true, because I don't know that that's something I've heard throughout the league, that players are coming out more ready after 1 year than they used to be. After all, there are a lot of people in the NBA who don't like the 1 year and in rule. How do you sort of view it from the Heat's perspective?
Honestly, I mean, it's a good point that you brought up about maybe it's just the fact that they're drafting Kentucky guys, and that's why Pat thinks that they're more far ahead. No, but I think it's true what you're saying, and I think what you guys have been saying, like we haven't really talked about the fact that when Hero was drafted, there was a logjam at shooting guard, wasn't there? I think what Leif was saying is really relevant, because they really do tend to pick best talent available over fit, and I think that's going to be just kind of a recurring theme for the Heat, and I think that's what we're going to analyze and probably find once we kind of go through it a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you mentioned that. I mean, what were there at one point, right? The Heat last year had the year before this, they had 6 shooting guards, didn't they? Like before Dwayne retired, they had Magruder before they dumped him on the last day of the season. They had Tyler Johnson, right? They had Wayne Ellington.
Rodney
They
Magruder.
had Dion Waiters, right? Yeah. They had all these different guys, and they basically cleaned the thing out. and took Hero. But I always go back to the one decision, and this predates most of what we're going to talk about today, but the decision to take Wade in 2003, because at the time there were some even very, very smart media people like Dan Lebitard who didn't like the pick because they had Eddie Jones at the 2. And that has never been something that has kind of shaped Pat's philosophy on any of this. Taking a player in the first round just to fill a need. They badly needed a point guard the year that they took Darrell Wright in the first round. They could have had Jameer Nelson. Now, Stan was the coach and wasn't really a Jameer fan at the time, which is kind of funny in retrospect, but they've never really drafted to need. And if you look at the past few years, I mean, guys, was Bam a need? I mean, they had Whiteside, right?
Yeah, no, that's the whole point is that, I mean, and you're really hitting on something even further back than where we're talking. Cause with Wade, I mean, I was convinced Kirk Heinrich was the pick because I was thinking, okay, that's the backcourt mate to Eddie Jones. And I'm glad that we went in another direction. I know there's been obviously so much talk of the Chris Kaman stuff and maybe that direction cause they needed a big at the time. So it's really in the weird part about this draft is that there's not so many guys that jump off the page as when you say best player available that have that superstar potential. So it's interesting if maybe this could be one of the rare opportunities to pivot and look at plugging a hole versus just taking best player available.
Yeah, I mean, Alex, we're going to look more in depth at this particular draft and kind of what the needs may be. I think in our next episode, we'll touch on kind of what the Heat's needs are. But let's look back a little bit at some of these drafts. I was going through them. Again, I only really went back through 2010 because we can get in the weeds here if we start to go to a previous Riley era where, you know, he seemed to be taking like 4-year guys like a Wayne Simeon or a Tim James who came in with good character, but couldn't really play. There were people that everybody had heard of, but they couldn't really play. But let's go back all the way to, I guess we'll start here in 2010. This was, I guess, right before they got LeBron, right? So this would have been like a couple of weeks or a week before they got LeBron and Bosh. And I'm looking back at this draft. They only got 87 NBA games out of this draft. Dexter Pittman in the second round, Jarvis Varnado in the second round, Deshaun Butler. I remember there were a lot of high hopes for Deshaun Butler. Remember he was hurt in college.
Yeah. He's the guy from West Virginia, right?
Yeah, and yeah, it's
like
just
tore his ACL or something.
Yeah, he tore his ACL very late in West Virginia. It was a sad story. He never really became any kind of a player. But again, I think the Pittman Varnado picks, although they didn't pan out, second round picks 32nd and 41st, kind of spoke to what I thought the rut that the Heat was in the draft at that point, where they took a couple of big projects just to see what they could do with them. And neither of them, I think you could tell pretty much from the start that neither of them were really NBA players.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, you're talking to somebody who back then was very hopeful about all three of those guys because I'm like, oh, they need these guys to, you know, work. If you're paying 3 max contracts, like they definitely needed one of those guys to work, I think. And I was hopeful about all of them. Like I looked at Varnado, I'm like, oh, this guy's going to be a cheap rim protector. And, you know, Pittman's going to be another solid big. And I was pretty optimistic, man. And like you said, I was optimistic about Butler too. I remember he was supposed to be a first round talent before the injuries, right? Like he was supposed to be a pretty highly touted prospect, I believe. But yeah, it was obvious that at the time, like they weren't really going to carve out a role for themselves. And you never really know, but it just never really stuck other than, you know, when Bosh went down and Pittman started a huge playoff game versus the Pacers with the Big Three blueprint on the line.
Can we explain now to people, again, going ahead to 2011, sort of what happened here? Because if you pop up Basketball Reference and look at the draft, you're going to see Bojan Bogdanovic there, who's had a very good career, 462 games, career 39% 3-point shooter. He's the kind of player you would think would fit in pretty well with the Heat, right? Like, I mean, he's averaged 14 points in his career. He's been a plus player. But that was the year, again, to explain to people, that was the year they took Norris Cole, correct? Or ended up flipping the pick to move up and take Norris Cole, Greg?
Exactly.
When they could have had Jimmy Butler, right?
Yeah. I think there may be even a couple other names in that list that jump off the page as kind of misses that you wish you would have gotten at that point. But yeah, essentially, like the big thing that I think is important as we kind of go back in history is that I feel like there's been a tremendous evolution in the way they approach this entire process between the big 3 years, which is kind of what we're unpacking at the moment, and then go forward from that, because we really, it was just kind of an afterthought, because, you just had the big 3 in town and it was kind of the rock star thing. So it's kind of hard to even analyze 2011, 2012, and 2013, because it just wasn't about draft picks at all. No process.
No process. The funny thing about this, Alex, is that Jimmy Butler was there at 30, and the Heat, again, they moved up to take Norris. So they wouldn't have been in position to take Norris. They moved up to take Norris. Jimmy Butler has the second highest, and I know not everybody's a fan of VORP, but I'm just looking at this stat on the Basketball Reference site. In terms of VORP for VORP, value over over replacement player. The top 5 in that draft are Kawhi, who was drafted 15th, Jimmy Butler, who was drafted 30th, Kyrie Irving, who was drafted 1st, Kemba, who was drafted 9th, and Vucevic, who was drafted.
No Klay Thompson.
Clay was drafted 11th. He's 7th in that category behind Vucevic and Isaiah Thomas, although you could certainly make an argument that Clay should be ahead of both of them and maybe ahead of Kemba as well, right there with Kawhi, under Kawhi, Butler, and Kyrie. Norris ends up being about 28th on this list. I mean, I will say this. The thing about Norris is he served his purpose, right? Like, they needed another point guard to play with Mario, because they didn't keep Patrick Beverley the year before. So, and remember, they had Carlos Arroyo. They brought in Bibby. It was like this rotation of point guards. They tried to move ahead of Rio. Rio basically beat them all out, essentially, but they needed somebody else who was another, point of attack defender. We talk about that a lot these days. And Norris had some important games for them. He was a rotation player for them during the 27-game winning streak. He was one of their 9 that they rolled out there. I don't really, and he fit the profile again of what they were looking for at the time. He played not in huge games, because he didn't go to a big school, but he was the best player on his team. He was the guy who had the ball in his hands at the end of games. You could kind of see, again, the type of tough-minded player that Pat liked. He fit in. Dwayne liked him. He just didn't have that high upside.
Exactly. I mean, they definitely had Mike Bibby PTSD when they were trying to get Norris Cole there. And he did, contribute with Rio in ending the Jeremy Lin phenomenon. So he had his moments, and you're right. He was absolutely a player that fit a need at the time. It was kind of like, we need to find a big, and you need to find a point guard to surround these 3. And that was kind of the strike at it with Norris Cole. Obviously, Jimmy Butler jumps off the page as a guy you wish you would have gotten at that moment. But I think at that time, it was the right pick, considering all circumstances. You never know when a guy like Jimmy is going to ascend the way that he did.
All right, let's look at the next year. And this comes 2012. This is after you win your first championship. You've got a late first-round pick. They were picking actually 27th, I believe. Anthony Davis went first in this draft, and then Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, so I guess the Knicks are still interested in, went second, and then Bradley Beal and Dion Waiters and Thomas Robinson, and then Dame Lillard. So that's interesting. It's like the 1, 3, and 6 picks are huge studs, right? AD, Bradley Beal, and Dame Lillard. And in between, you've got MKG, Dion, and Thomas Robinson. So a lot of variance there. The Heat picked 27. Now, this is the one that I will take a little bit of credit for, because on that draft night, I kept saying if Draymond Green made it to 27, the Heat had to take Draymond Green. He was the perfect kind of Shane. Ultimately, he would have been the Shane Battier replacement, but perfect sort of fit for that team. Could have played multiple positions, tough. You saw at Michigan State, he was a leader type. The players gravitated towards him. He won a ton of games. He played in the Final Four. I think did they win a championship at Michigan State? Or they were, they did, right? Or they were close.
I think they did. I'm not a college basketball historian, but I think that they did get one.
I think they did get one. All right. So I wrote on before draft night, if Draymond Green's there at 27, I know there were certain people inside the Heat organization or right around it. Like for instance, Tim Hardaway, who were pushing hard for Draymond. I was told that Riley didn't think he was in good enough shape. Actually, they ended up taking Moultrie and trading Arnett Moultrie, who never really played much in the NBA. He only played 2 seasons, 59 games, and then trading out of the pick. Again, this kind of gets back to the point where during the Big 3 era, they just didn't think the picks were all that important.
No, and I think that it involved Justin Hamilton, which I think was another strike at a stretch big. I remember there being some Heat Twitter excitement about the possibilities that there a little bit. But this was also an era, and I think it's important to recognize that one of the things that was taking place with these late firsts is that you wanted to get out of maybe some guaranteed contract money that comes with any first round pick. So there was an inspiration to get into the second round and trade back because those non-guaranteed contracts, provided more flexibility in who they could acquire and things like that. But I mean, you mentioned Draymond Green, Jay Crowder was there, Chris Middleton was there, Will Barton was there. There were a lot of great players that were on the board. I mean, even like the Mike Scotts of the world, Kyle O'Quinn's of the world could have helped in retrospect. But this was, again, a situation that I think there was a little bit of a financial motivation associated with why they traded out.
I mean, you mentioned Crowder and Green were drafted 34th and 35th. Jay's played 608 games. Draymond's played 576. The guy they didn't draft Moultrie to keep him, but he ended up playing 59 games. You know what's funny? I always look back at the guy that fans wanted at the time just to kind of see how that played out. The guy that a lot of Heat fans wanted that year was Perry Jones.
100%. Yeah.
Right. Oh, yeah. Right. Athletic, big. I think he was coming off an injury out of Baylor. He went to OKC. He was with a lot of other athletic players. And
remember, everybody thought that he was going to be such a steal for the Thunder.
And I thought so too.
They got their fourth guy. They got their other cornerstone.
I thought he
did it again.
I thought he might be the Ibaka replacement ultimately, but it didn't pan out at all. But yeah, that was the guy they talked about. In fact, Golden State took Ezeli 2 picks after Perry Jones, and he actually gave them more than Perry Jones did before he got hurt and kind of flamed out of league. All right, we're going to keep going on this because I do think it's educational to kind of see where this panned out and how how the Heat's sort of thinking on all of this stuff has evolved. Before we do, I want to tell you about another great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. We've been telling you about safecubbies.com for a while because this is something that you definitely need. We are living in COVID times. Just because the election is over, no, COVID did not go away as soon as the election was over. At least the election was called. You still need to make sure your workplace is safe. If you have a child who's back in school, you want to make sure that the school is aware of what may be offered to them. So you got to check out safecubbies.com. They offer custom sneeze guards and shields, and also they stock sizes of sneeze guards and shields. They can create office partitions. They can work with restaurants, businesses, schools, all of that kind of stuff. They do floor decals for social distancing. They do PPE and COVID signage. They also do touch-free sanitizer stands with and without branding. So if you need sanitizers all over your facility, wherever it may be, reach out to safecubbies.com. You see those everywhere. Well, you can put branding on them as well. They also do branded face masks. And Safe Cubbies will come out and perform a site survey and provide a free estimate. So you've got nothing to lose. And they also do the installation. So reach out to Chris and his great people at safecubbies.com. Chris lives right here in Broward County. Huge sports fan, and this is really a great service that he's providing. He's been in a bunch of different businesses, but this is the business for this particular time. So reach out to safecubbies.com. All right, let's go a little bit deeper now. We'll go to 2013. Now, again, in this one, the Heat did not have a pick at all, Greg, correct?
Yeah, this it's funny that you say that. I'm on Basketball Reference earlier today, and it doesn't even show up in the log of all the draft picks for Miami. It's like that draft literally never even happened, and it was just one where, again, they were in championship chasing mode. They were looking for veterans to take less money to come and be part of a championship group, and so it wasn't about development, which it's just interesting now that they can actually do both, because it seems like they should have been able to do maybe a little bit more of that back then, but they punted that draft completely.
And then so the next year, I'm looking at this one, and I'm trying to I covered all these, but the draft was such an afterthought. What did they do with PJ Hairston in 2014?
So they drafted PJ Harrison, and they traded him immediately to Charlotte for Shabazz Napier. And Napier was taken 2 picks before. It's kind of the infamous LeBron pick because of the tweets and saying that he was his favorite player in college basketball, I think, or something like that. So it felt like it was a LeBron influenced pick in terms of the lines of communication were a little weird at that time. So anything they could do to dangle a carrot in LeBron's direction and say, we're making this pick with you in mind. I think that some of that was in play there. But a guy that they loved also was Clint Capella. He went a pick before PJ Harrison. I had heard that if Clint Capella had been there at 26, that they may not have made that trade up for Shabazz Napier.
I heard the same thing. They really liked Capella, and actually liking Capella played somewhat into the decision to take Bam, because at the time they saw some similarities. They weren't the only ones, by the way. There were a lot of people making the comparison between Bam and Clint Capella. We obviously see now that Bam is a much more multifaceted player with a much higher ceiling, but at the time they liked him. I'm looking at that draft now, and again, this was kind of the end of the Big Three era. They didn't really know LeBron was going to leave. The guys who've panned out who were taken after Jokic may be the best player in this draft, right? Along with Embiid, who was taken third.
You were never taking him.
Right? Oh, no, there was no chance. There was no chance. No, absolutely. With Pat's view on foreign players at the time. But he was
wasn't
drafted.
Even talking about that part.
No, there's no. Oh, the conditioning? No chance. Drafted 41st to Denver. You look at the rest of that. Jeremy Grant's had a very productive career. He was 39th. He seems like a Heat player. Joe Harris was the one at 33. I covered his rookie year in Cleveland. David Blatt threw him out there once for like 30 straight minutes to sink or swim. At the time, I didn't really think Joe Harris was going to become the playable guy he is now. I thought he'd be a shooter, but there really wasn't a lot in that second round anyway. I mean, other than Jokic, it was not a great draft. Jordan Clarkson's had a pretty good career, but that was about it. So the real pivot, guys, comes in the next year because now LeBron is gone, okay? And now you have an actual pretty high pick. You're picking 10th and you're picking 40th. And I just remember I was at a draft party for 790 and we all kind of targeted. I went to the pre-draft camp that year because the draft that year was a big deal for the Heat. And I remember interviewing Justice Winslow and interviewing Stanley Johnson and interviewing a whole bunch of players who I thought could go to the Heat. But Winslow was one I did not think would get there. Winslow was projected by a lot of people to go top 5, potentially to the Knicks. When he fell to the Heat, I think most Heat fans were, unlike the Hero and Bam picks, they were ecstatic. Looking back on it now.
Oh, no.
I'm going to start with Alex on this one. Looking back on it now, would you have done something different at 10?
Why do you do this to me?
I'm going to you first for that reason.
Oh, man. I mean, look, man, if you're giving me hindsight, then you take Devin Booker. Like, I might have to edit this out of the pod. Like, I might not let this see the light of day. But yeah, armed with hindsight, I'm taking Devin Booker. Other than that, I mean, there was no way you could pass on Winslow at the time. Like, he had just come off winning the title with Duke, and he looked really, really good, by the way, in that run. Like, he looked like maybe their best player throughout that run. And I thought he was really impressive. Obviously, he was supposed to go higher than that. And I thought it made a lot of sense at the time. I remember being in the arena when he got drafted, the entire arena going crazy, which is kind of funny because you wouldn't think that, just Heat fans are really into the draft and all that. But no, everybody in that arena went crazy when Winslow was drafted by the Heat.
It felt like an absolute home run. And I don't think, I know we have the benefit of hindsight, but Winslow was the slam dunk pick. It felt like the Caron Butler pick all over again, that guy just fell in their lap that was going to be able to kind of take the organization in a new direction and kind of it was like a new era. But this also is an underrated moment where I feel like Miami's philosophy or the gem mining in terms of late second round picks, not just undrafted free agents with the J Rich pick, because none of us really knew much about Josh Richardson. We knew that he had some experience and things like that. And I think now we probably as Heat fans may call this the Josh Richardson draft before we would say it's the Justice Winslow draft.
Yeah, I want to get to Josh in a second. Before I do, I want to look at the top end of this draft because, again, just to put into perspective, okay, that the Heat didn't bomb here as badly as a lot of people think they did. If you look at this particular draft, right, Towns goes first. I mean, look, I know people have issues with Cat and toughness, that kind of thing, but I mean, you can't argue with the production. Okay, so first overall, D'Angelo Russell, who kind of gets a second chance to, now that he's playing with Karl Anthony Towns, but obviously he's been an all-star. But then it gets a little dicey. Okay, Okafor at 3 has kind of resurrected his career, but I think a lot of the things that people said about him when he came out of college, that he didn't really have a modern game, have played out. Porzingis has been really good. I mean, and I missed on him because I saw him in this first summer league and I didn't love him. If he didn't have the injury, he might be an all-star by now. He may be an all-star ultimately. But then there's some garbage here, like Hazonia. I mean, at most, he's a role player now. Cauley Stein, same. Moutier is a backup at best. Stanley Johnson, is he even still in the league? He was.
Yeah, he's. I think he may be at the end of the bench.
On the Raptors.
Yeah,
on the
Toronto.
Raptors, right?
But back then, truthfully though, as I looked through all of these guys, the only pick that made people like kind of gasp and groan was the Moutier pick by Denver at 7.
Yes.
A lot of these other guys like Hazonia, Willie Cauley-Stein, Stanley Johnson, even Frank Kaminsky, like they were kind of thought of as good picks. There weren't a lot of griping going on. The Moutier pick was doubted, but even when you get to Winslow and Miles Turner by Indiana, none of this was a surprise or I mean, now obviously Devin Booker jumps off the page, but at the time, Moutier was the only guy that I think people kind of blinked at.
And that's why this is a little unfair to the Heat because, you can say they should have taken Booker at 10, and in retrospect, they should have. And, obviously, there was the Kentucky thing, and they liked him quite a bit. And even Spoelstra admitted that during the playoffs this year, which I was surprised he actually went there. But I mean, if you're going to argue that you should have taken Booker over Winslow, you can certainly argue that Orlando should have taken Booker over Hazonia, or Sacramento should have taken him over Cauley-Stein, or Denver should have taken him over Moutier, or Detroit should have taken him after Stanley Johnson, or Charlotte should have taken after Kaminsky, or Charlotte should have taken all the picks from Boston, or Miami should have taken all those picks from Boston that they were offering to move up. Okay, and Boston ended up taking Rozier at 16. But I'm not going to kill the Heat on this one. They did not get a bad player at 10. And then, like you mentioned, they kind of salvaged the whole thing with Josh Richardson, who actually right now, if you look at VORP, through this point of his career, he's 10th in this draft. And in some categories, he's higher than that in terms of win shares and overall production. I mean, I think some of the guys that are ahead of him on some of those categories, like Larry Nance and DeLon Wright, you'd rather have Josh Richardson. I mean, he's a top 6 or 7 player in this draft. So I don't think the Dolphins. Dolphins on my mind today. I don't think the Heat did poorly there. And then both guys were contributors on a team that was one win from the Eastern Conference Finals, and probably gets there if either Whiteside or Bosch was healthy by the end. So they
were both great contributors to playoff teams as rookies. And by the way, Leif mentioned the Caron Butler thing before, and the last part about it is that this really is the Caron Butler pick because it was a wing you got drafted at 10 and a guy you ended up trading to help you get closer to the finals.
That's exactly right. No, it did play out that way. And again, you got so I don't think they did.
And look, by the way, just not to interrupt you again, but like, with all those guys that you named that went ahead, like he did pretty damn good in this draft. Like Winslow was a good player, even with the injury stuff. He was a good player. They were able to get stuff for him. Like you said, they got a ton of value out of Richardson, and they just got to thank their lucky stars they didn't end up with Stanley Johnson or, more importantly, Frank Kaminsky. Oh my God! Like I'm getting shudders down my spine just at the idea of the Heat taking Frank Kaminsky in that draft, because boy has he stunk. And there's a lot of those guys in the top 10 in that draft. So I'm good with it.
The worst part for the Heat was that Kaminsky had a couple of moments against them in that playoff series, which was where the hell did that come from? All right, we're going to get to the last couple of years and, of course, the big Kentucky picks after a word here from Manscaped.com. We'll get back to our episode here in a second. Before we do, I want to tell you about another of the great sponsors of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. You know, Knicks are no good in the NBA. You're familiar with that? The Knicks are no good. Well, Knicks are no good when you're shaving certain parts of your body either. So that's why Manscaped has redesigned the electric trimmer. The Manscaped engineering team spent 18 months perfecting the greatest ball hair trimmer ever created. I never thought I would actually say that on a podcast. And just released the new and improved Lawnmower 3.0. Their third generation trimmer features a cutting edge ceramic blade to reduce grooming accidents thanks to advanced skin safe technology pioneered by Manscaped. When I tell you this is premium, I mean premium. The battery will last up to 90 minutes, so you can take a longer shave. The waterproof technology allows you to groom in the shower. One of the coolest features is the LED light, which illuminates grooming areas for a closer and more precise trimming. And let's not forget about the charging stand. Show your mower off loud and proud, because this intelligently designed stand is a convenient charging dock powered by USB. If you're listening to me speak right now, I want you to experience it firsthand for yourself. Make sure you trim yourself. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code 5RSN at manscaped.com. And now this is where I end my career. Your balls will thank you. And now back to the episode. All right, Ethan Skolnick back on 5 on the floor. All right, so let's look ahead here a little bit. Now we get through the Winslow and Richardson draft, guys. And so that leads us up to 2016. The Heat were coming off getting, like I mentioned, to the second round of the playoffs, to Game 7 against Toronto. They lose. Greg, again, there's no pick here, so can you please remind me what happened?
I don't remember exactly, but they were they were either paying for Big Three era sins, or they were paying up Goran's trade transactions. One of the two is by the show 16 side of the NBA draft ledger.
All right, so let's look ahead. Yeah, I can't exactly recall. So let's get to the 2 picks.
I think that was part of the Goran trade.
It was part of the Goran trade, right? Because they had flipped him, and then of course Bosch got hurt. Not hurt, excuse me,
for that year, and then the future pick as well, I believe.
Right. So 16 and 18, right?
I think so.
Yeah, those were the 2. All right, so let's get to 2017 and 2019. I called them the Nekias was wrong drafts because he didn't like either guy from Kentucky at the time. We've given him enough grief about it. But Bam at 14, again, to revisit this a little bit, that draft, again, is going to go down as a strange one because the first pick overall, basically a team moves up to take a guy first overall, flips Boston another pick. Boston ends up with arguably the best player in this draft in Jason Tatum. Philly gives up on Fultz right away. You had Lonzo Ball at 2. Josh Jackson's been a huge bust at 4. De'Aaron Fox, I think we've talked about needing a change of scenery, but he's obviously been a really quality player since he's come in. Then Isaac Markkanen. You got Frank, I can never pronounce his name, but I'm not even going to try. The defensive guard with the Knicks, okay? They think he's better than he really is. Dennis Smith's been a bust, has gone up to New York. That hasn't panned out. Zach Collins is okay, can't stay healthy. Malik Monk has been a disappointment. Luke Kennard has had some moments. And then Donovan Mitchell, again, and then Bam. But looking through this, if you redrafted this thing, Greg, where does Bam go?
He goes 1 or 2. I think that it's him and Jason Tatum up at the top, right? That's
ahead of Mitchell.
Okay, yeah, I guess Donovan Mitchell too. I guess I was over. That's an oversight by me there. So he's in
definitely over Fox.
He's top 3. Yeah, I think you do take Bam over Fox because of the defensive versatility at his position and all the things that he's able to do initiating offense as a big. I feel like Bam has kind of proven himself in ways that Fox has yet to. So I think he's a top 3 pick. And I think considering all of the hype surrounding Lonzo Ball specifically, I remember back to Riley kind of flying around the country, watching Lonzo Ball falling in love, and some Heat fans getting a little weary of that. A guy like John Collins was somebody a lot of Heat fans were looking at back then. The Donovan Mitchell pick, though, was 1 pick away. I think that was universally the guy that the Heat fans wanted. Adebayo that year, I'll never forget, the very first name I heard associated with the Heat was Bam Adebayo. And then every time I asked about him after that, I got radio silence, like it was completely quiet. So I then discounted that initial information and never even circled back to him, and then felt like such an idiot when I had initially heard that name, that's who they actually went and got. And so but in hindsight, that was a slam dunk. It's probably the best draft in Heat history, right?
Well, I think 2003.
Oh, excuse me. Besides Dwayne. Oh my gosh.
I think it's second right now. I think it's second in light of the fact that you weren't picking in the top 10. You've got a guy who's an all-star in his third season with huge upside at age 22, who is a total team guy, who is somebody who can be a face of a franchise. I mean, there's no way they thought he was that. Riley even acknowledged that he didn't think he was that. He thought he had the chance to be something special, but he didn't think it was going to happen this quickly. I can tell you that on the night of the draft, I spoke to somebody very high up with the Heat who said, we did more research on Bam Adebayo than any player we've ever picked. He's the anti-Hassan. That's what I was told. And that's pretty much what he was. But Alex, it took guts to take him, considering that you had just given Hassan Whiteside $90 million, right? Like, I mean,
that and Kelly Olynyk, they had just paid Olynyk with a 4-year deal, which obviously wasn't the same as giving Hassan a max, but it's like you thought that they were set there at that position. And I think I mean, you talk about Bam being the anti-Hassan, like that is just the most accurate depiction of him that there is, especially with just the way that everything turned out, where it's like, they literally moved on from Hassan because of how much they believed in Bam. And then he ended up just being everything you would ever wanted out of Hassan put together in like one season. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty fair depiction. It definitely took guts for them to take Bam at the time. Like, I'm pretty sure, similar to Hero, like it was a guy who was kind of thought of as maybe being closer to the 20th pick than the 13th pick.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt the same way in draft night, just like everybody else. It's like, okay, this guy was kind of projected to go further back. And that's just, more of the Heat showing that, when they really believe in a guy, they're just going to go after him, and they don't really care about mock drafts. They have their own rankings, and obviously their scouting department is top notch, and they know what they're doing. So I think we're at that point now where we can trust them. But back then it was definitely a gutsy pick for sure.
And we mentioned 2018 was the Dragic, one of the picks for the Dragic acquisition. So we go to 2019. Now we've done a whole episode on this, so we don't need to revisit it entirely. But I think now when you look at it, was it with you, Greg, or with you, Alex, that I did this episode, the Hero ep?
No, I think we did. I think Jesus. I think you did it with me.
Yeah, I think it was with you. Okay, so I think we agreed that if you redrafted 2019 now we did this before the playoffs, okay? I think you and I both had him like 6th, all right? Now look at it.
He's higher now.
I mean, now look at it, okay? Zion is 1 still, right?
Yes.
Morant is 2.
Yes.
Make an argument for somebody else ahead of Hero on this list. Barrett, Hunter, Garland, Culver, White, Hayes, Hachimura, Reddish, Cam Johnson, PJ Washington.
No, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know where the argument is at this point. I mean, I guess you could go with RJ. I guess that's the one guy because he was supposed to be the highly touted prospect coming in and all that. Was the number 1 player in during their high school years. But I mean, there's no way you could put him above Hero after this season. Like, I understand he's playing on a terrible team. The Knicks are just a horrible situation. And like Julius Randle's his best player, his best teammate. So I feel for RJ, but no, what Hero did in the regular season and specifically in the playoffs, he's there. He's number 3.
I'm with
and
you.
John might be number 1 right now.
Let's give it the year.
Let's give it the way that he's played.
Zion's going to be coached now. He's going to be coached. I mean, I
Wow.
I feel like that changes that. I'm not a huge.
Shots fired.
It's not that. It's just Stan is, in my view, and when he's not doing the GM stuff, okay, he's an elite coach, and I don't believe that Zion had an elite coach, and I feel like that was always going to be the decision that Griff made. If he had to make one, and I think they'll build the right team around Zion. They were building that thing on the fly. But look, I'm with you guys. To me, the one guy on this list, Hachimura showed me a little something this year, and I think Reddish has potential. And I like PJ Washington. The other guy is Brandon Clark, who was taken after Tyler.
Oh yeah.
But to me, I really struggle to see anybody beyond Zion and Ja because of where RJ is. If RJ was somewhere else, I think I'd look at him differently. If he was drafted to any of like 15 other teams, but he wasn't. And so as long as he's in New York with that particular situation, I just don't see it. All right, we're going to do more and more draft episodes. We just wanted to kind of dig into what the Heat have done. I will give you guys 30 seconds each. Overall philosophy shift for the Heat. Greg, can you sort of encapsulate it, and do you like it?
I mean, obviously I like it because the fact that we can go into drafts and be excited about the picks, because we griped about Adebayo and Hero, and fans kind of didn't love those picks, and were proven really, really wrong. I think that it's just it allows us to go into this with a little bit more of a clear conscience and excitement. So I love the philosophy shift.
Alex?
Yeah, I'm with you there. They kind of, I think, like the way that they drafted, especially in recent years, has kind of been in a way that, like I mentioned before, they, once they figure out who they really like, they're all in on those guys, no matter where it's like where they're supposed to be drafted or ranked or whatever. And I really like that, man, because it just shows like the trust in the department that they have there, that just keeps churning out more and more surprises. Like every time we think they're done, like you get a Kendrick Nunn and Duncan Robinson in the same year, and we just kind of take it for granted. So I think the past few years has been the kind of shift towards the developmental stuff. I really like that. And I think before it was obviously a little bit hit or miss as we went through, but I'm all in with what they're doing right now. Like, I think just kind of telling everybody, shut up. We know what we're doing and we're going to do what we do. Other than that Shabazz Napier pick, which feels like the only one that kind of, maybe was the last pick before they went to that full developmental shift. But even then, it's just like they had to do it, right? Those are mitigating circumstances when you're talking about a generational GOAT talent like LeBron James. I guess you got to make that pick and, not get Clint Capella. But at the end of the day, like I like where they're at now. I think this is what they're going to keep doing. And KZ Okpala, just more of the same, like another guy who didn't necessarily, they didn't need that type of player. I think it's just another guy who they believe in, and they're going to go after his development and make sure that he pans out to what they think he's going to be.
Yeah, we like who we like. That's the philosophy these days. That and no more Duke guys. Those are the two things. All right, check out our sponsors, markbrownpa.com, safecubbies.com, and of course, manscaped.com. Use the code 5RSN. Remember, Alf promised to shave his head if the presidential election went a certain way. So that's going to happen on our stream this week. He's not getting out of that thing. We'll talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the Five on the Floor on the Five Regional Sports Network.